Hi, and welcome to Deer IQ, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, 20-plus year educator, 30-plus year deer hunter, hunt tastefully seasoned outdoor writer, and I'm here to help you achieve what we all hope for, to be truly greater deer hunters. This is the start of our new series, Private Land When You're King. Around 90% of whitetail deer are taken on private land. But when you're the boss, what are the pitfalls and how can you best rule your domain to be a better land manager and have better success on deer? That's what we're digging into with our experts in this series and trying to answer. As we start this first episode, I want to challenge you to do a couple things. First, download our free journal to use with this podcast. That's really going to help. Second, as you do that, here are the top look-fors or things to look for during this episode. What is the biggest problem hunters face to private land being better or as good as it could or should be? What is the first thing to consider when you have control or take control of private land? How do you best deal with the neighbor problem? Yeah, we've all had them, and it's an issue sometimes. How should you really look at food plots? This may be different than you're used to. And I have a few challenges at the end that I believe will really take your hunting skills up several notches, so make sure to stay and listen for that. And now, let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. All right, I am here with Jared Van Hees. Jared, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam. Good to see you and talk to you again.
Yeah, we've been in this scenario before, but I've been on your podcast. If you don't know Jared, he has the Habitat podcast. He also has a business with food plotting and seed, Vitalized Seed Company. And we're going to jump into, we're in the year theme, our unit to be a greater deer hunter. What does it take and what do great deer hunters do differently than other people, and how can most of us become greater deer hunters? And we're in the series Private Land When You're King. And when you're in charge of things, what does that look like and what can you do to best up your odds, right? And so before we dig into some of these deeper questions, Jared, maybe tell a little bit about yourself for people in the audience that don't really know who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. My name's Jared Van Hees. I'm from Grand Haven, Michigan, live over in Livingston County now. I have a wife, 3 kids. I love to deer hunt and work on habitat on the properties. I am a landowner. I am basically obsessed with trying to bow hunt mature whitetail. I'll gun hunt too. I'm not against that. And, I'm love bringing my family, get my kids with me in the blind, even if that means, less chance of a mature buck. I'm okay with that. I'm 36. I've been doing the Habitat podcast for about 5.5 years now. Started that in early 2018. And that's, like your slogan, ours is to become better habitat managers. So it's very similar in the fact of we're just trying to be better, right? Grow and be more skilled, more knowledgeable. And then about a little over a year ago, my partner Albert and I formed a seed company called Vitalized Seed Company. There was just a gap in the market, and we were getting requests to help people out, and we decided to turn it into a business model and see what would happen. And we've been very, very blessed since, except for the fact that it's been a drought in the fall and a drought this spring. If I sit here smiling randomly, it's because I'm looking at rain for the first time in like a month out my window right now. So
awesome. Well, talking about private land, and I've observed that sometimes people that own land, or maybe land's been in the family for a long time, or even people that buy land for the purpose of hunting, a lot of times they don't know what they're doing with it, or they think they know what they're doing with it, and they make some mistakes, or they aren't really realizing the full potential of the control, right? Like when you have control of the land, what can you do? So from your perspective, I think it's a great opportunity, but then what? Then what do we do with it? How are hunters failing to take advantage of this power that they have and take control with the land and their hunting situations? Like, what do you see as far as that goes?
Great question. I think the failing or being the king, right? Having the power, that can go both ways. That can be either you're doing everything right and in a good way, or like you mentioned, failing and doing everything wrong, or maybe nothing at all. And that's what I see the most of is either I'd say most commonly it's not doing enough, not improving, just sitting back and maybe, oh man, I didn't get my buck this year. I didn't see anything at this spot on our property, or 40 acres is not very good, and then the same thing happens next year and next year without anything ever changing, right? It's like the definition of insanity. But if you can go change things year after year, you then I would say have the power. But that would be my main failure I see is just maybe paralysis by analysis or intimidation to get started because you don't want to do the wrong things. And then I guess secondly would be we see some wrong things or mistakes made as well as probably a number two answer there.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like a lot of times, and I've written articles about this too, but just that people start to blame, like you mentioned, like, oh, I'm not having success. And they start to become a victim or like
Sure.
come up with a reason as to why they aren't having success. And when we can really realize we do have control to a large extent, you can't control everything, but you have more control than I think people realize. You can start to take actions to change that. And so, exactly what does that look like? Like, what are some of the top things hunters can do when they are in control to make the best possible hunting opportunities? Like, what are some of those things they should be doing to start taking that control back?
Yeah, something you touched on there, the victim thing. A lot of the common ones that you and I probably both hear are if I don't shoot it, my neighbor's gonna shoot it, right? Or you can't eat the horns or things like that, which is fine to each their own. But if you shoot that buck, it's 100% not gonna live if it's a younger buck. So, one thing that I think people can do is pass on younger deer. That's going to make everybody's hunting experience better if everybody in the neighborhood maybe gets together and starts doing that. Um, Secondly, I would think how you access your property. It may be the biggest thing out of everything we talk about. It's up there in the top three for sure. How do you get to where you're going to hunt? That is and get out when it's done. That is probably the one of the largest mistakes I see.
Yeah, there's studies out there, and I mean, if you haven't figured out from experience, depending on where you're at, how many years you've been hunting, all this stuff, there's studies out there that literally show that like one encounter after hunting a stand one time, most of the time, you're educating deer, you're affecting deer movement. So really planning that out is super important. So when it comes to
Right.
private land and I can control that, and let's say I just bought a property or I just got access to a property and I have some control over it. And I guess that's the caveat here is we're assuming, in this situation that people have control of some sort. So if you do have that control and you're starting this game plan, like what does that look like? Yeah. So do you plan around access? Is that like your main thing you're starting to work around as far as your game plan for like setting up a property or looking at how you want to develop it?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. When we do our podcast land plans, access is number one. So that would be whether we're walking the parcel first with you to determine maybe what issues or not issues, shortfalls your property may have, challenges, right? Like where I'm sitting now up north, we have very, very steep hillsides. And that the easiest way down is right through the middle of the property down this little draw. But that's the worst spot to go down the hill if you're deer hunting. So you try to, number one, scout and see what you're working with first, and then access. It's the first thing that I'll draw out on these plans, and it's usually around the outer edges for the most part, and go in, to hunt or to surgical strike when the time's right. Yeah, it's definitely first or second on the list all the time.
And you mentioned in there two neighbors, right? I mean, most people have limited property, or there's not an infinite amount, so we have these boundaries, right? And I think we educate deer. Like, deer don't know boundaries, but they do know where they're safe and where they aren't, right? Due to pressure and
Yeah.
hunting and sanctuaries and things like that. So neighbors become kind of critical to it. What's the approach to neighbors? Because, growing up and hunting on some private, as I was growing up, it was, the neighbors are the problem. And in a sense, that's partly true if you're not on the same page. So you look at your land, you look at your access routes and stuff, and these are things you can control to keep yourself from screwing up your own hunting, right? A lot of times we're our own worst enemies, I think. Like the neighbors are going to, do this or that. So it kind of pushes you to make some mistakes or be too aggressive on private land when you should be much more strategic, planning out your entries and exits, and really just saving your land and just keeping it a pristine environment, I guess.
Yeah.
But so what's it look like, managing relationships with neighbors to, if you've got this little piece, whether it be 10 acres or 40 or even 200, the neighbors come into play. What's the approach to that for guys?
Another solid question, Adam, and I think that can go two different ways. At least that's what I'm gonna think about right while we're talking. I think one, your neighbors are always going to be part of the equation. So the best thing you can do is communicate, over communicate, try to get them on the same page. Send them pictures of deer that you have, send them pictures of deer you're passing, whatever it could be. Just over communicate, and that's the perfect world. They respond back, they send you pictures, you go have a beer after one of you shoots a deer. It's great. um, my 15 acres, I had that with one neighbor across the road. The two that were next to me, a little bit different story. So now let's get into the different story. I think that if you have neighbors that are, see what you're doing, hunting, close up, maybe not in the same plan as you in terms of age structure, they start hunting your property borders, even on a little 15-acre parcel. Um, then there's habitat things and hunting strategy things you can do to help. And by what I mean, one in particular is to lay down walls of cover and trees in between you and the neighbors. And you're pretty much putting up a fence. Um, and yeah, you can't keep the deer contained. I understand that. But like you said, a big buck or most deer are going to know who's putting too much pressure on their ground and who's not. And if we're preserving ours, like you mentioned, and only going in at the right time, while the neighbors have been hunting for 2 weeks already, the deer know which property to walk through. So those are the two ways I'd handle that.
Yeah, that's good. Like almost like a push and pull. You
Mm-hmm.
might think of it like the best you can. Like I think a lot of people struggle with sharing. Like they want to keep information to themselves when in
Sure.
reality it's not probably changing too much about what the neighbors are doing or your success in the end.
Right.
By building in those roads, you're actually influencing them, sharing those pictures. A lot of guys don't want to do that, but
True.
odds are they probably already know if there's a big buck around. They probably already know themselves if they've got cameras and all that. So it's what are you really hiding type thing, but it's building trust. And maybe even if they aren't on the same page the first year or two, maybe looking at the long approach to the relationship, maybe we can get on the same page, sharing, hey, we're going to do this. If you want to join us, if they say no, you just keep going forward and maybe they see results and get on board over time. But I think that's
Yeah.
big. And yeah, if neighbors don't, then you have okay, well, you're actually benefiting me too. And looking at it that way, instead of looking at the neighbors of like, oh, they're bad and negative, well, they're choosing to hunt this way. They're actually going to push deer on our property. Now we just need to make it a magnet and keep them there, right?
Yep, and I think you said it perfectly. And I think there's still going to be the exception out there, I'm sure, where you just got a real bad neighbor. But there are steps you can take in the right direction to help you and your property.
Hi, this is Adam Lewis with DeerIQ.com, and this is your High IQ Moment. Since around 90% of all deer are taken on private land, as according to an NDA survey, this means that the most opportunity is probably on private land both now and in the future. So the question is, are you investing in that area, since by the numbers it's yielding the most results and is going to be your best odds long-term shot? What can you do to invest in private land? It could be saving to buy. If you already own, investing in a good land plan and improving your land to hold deer, or investing in relationships with other landowners to get and keep access to hunting privileges. However you look at it, the numbers don't lie, so find a way to invest in your hunting future on private land. It's a high IQ move. And if you're getting something out of this podcast, consider sharing it with a buddy who may benefit, and also commenting, liking, or reviewing, depending on where you're watching or listening to this. This helps the podcast grow and is greatly appreciated. Okay, and now back to the podcast. Looking at, so let's say setting up my property or trying to make it the best it can possibly be, it's all about, I'd say, getting in the deer's head, like understanding a deer, which is on one hand difficult to do, but on the other hand, I don't think it's that hard if we really know their needs, right? And so you work a lot with habitat, different things. So here's a question for you. If a hunter could get in a deer's head as far as a deer's needs, as far as his habitat needs, and could understand this, how would they see their private land differently? How would they hunt differently?
I like that question when I was reading that last night, and I think that this may be kind of corny, but so imagine yourself, in a deer walking through a property. And I'll relate it to food and a little bit of pressure. I would say property A will be the untouched park-like setting that nobody's done any habitat work on, and pressured too much throughout time. And property B will be the perfect scenario, or a better scenario. I think property A, in terms of food, you'd be walking through, the vegetable aisle at the store. You or me, right? We're walking through, and while we like vegetables, it's not the only thing we eat. So we're walking through. Okay, this is good. I'll eat some of this, and that's great. We're property B. Adding diversity to the property, I would say it would be more like walking through, I don't know, Golden Corral, right? You got cheeseburgers over here, you got salad over here, you have ice cream over here. Again, spare me the corniness here, but it's the diversity in the food type that deer are attracted to, just like us. I mean, it's already been proven. You can go look it up. But so that would be how I compare the food thing, right? Just maybe like a monoculture on A, where there's not much of a choice of diversity, and then B would be lots of choices, different age of food, tenderness, palatability, all that. Then with cover, which is directly can be the food sometimes too in a timber setting. A, if it's a park-like setting and nothing's been done, all mature timber, I'd say it'd be like walking through, Central Park at night. Like kind of wondering, can't see who's around the corner, just kind of scary. Not a lot of cover for the deer to hide. Maybe Central Park's great. I haven't walked through there at night, so I don't really know. But it would be like not feeling very secure is what I'm getting at. And then property B, where you have, some hinge cut bedding areas, some TSI work, some sunlight, be like walking through, I don't know, like walking through a bank where everybody's, pretty secure and locks on the doors and everything else. Or like my my kid's school, for instance. It's like a Fort Knox to get in and out of that place, and it's you feel a lot more secure, and the deer as well. If they have cover all around them, they're not in the wide open. You don't see a big buck walking through the wide open field at 10 in the morning very often, unless it's a rut. There's a reason for that. So I hope that wasn't too terrible of a comparison, but that's kind of where my brain went first last night. And I'm like, I'll roll with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And so, yeah, think about what a deer needs, right? Obviously, food. You've got the security, and then we can throw breeding in there, which we can chat about later. But you can't control, I guess, the breeding on your property, but you could, I guess, set up where the does might be or where that might take place, right? But
Yeah, I think if you're going to do all the improvements and add the diversity with the food and the cover, the does are going to be there. I
right.
just kind of figured that as an automatic. Yeah, the does will be there for sure.
Yeah, so if you've got a place like downtown Detroit, you're not going to walk through there probably at night. And
Correct.
just being honest about what would deer want? What do deer need? Do deer have food for all year round, or just one time a year where you might see them on your property or not? Do they feel secure all year round as well? And really setting those up is the basis of a game plan for land management, right?
Correct. And that's what we do. Yeah, we'll go through anywhere from access and stand locations to water holes to food plots. Uh, and again, with the food plots are more supplemental than they are, the majority of a deer's diet. So the timber work and opening sunlight to the forest floor, to me, are more important. It's because deer's diet is more browse than it is food plot or forbs even. So all of that to say, all that needs to be set up, and you can do all of this. So that's the thing. Are you doing anything, or are you doing all of it, or at least trying to? You're gonna have different outcome.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys get hung up, and especially when you first started getting into it. And everybody's at a different place in this journey.
For sure.
And especially like I have this chart, and maybe I'll link back to the podcast it's on, of the deer hunter growth continuum. And it starts kind of, I call it, you start as a kid, and as you grow, you become, this sage at the very end of it. And you're somewhere on that, and it might depend on what you're actually doing too. Are you talking about public land hunting? Are you talking about
Sure.
private land hunting or food plotting? And, you're somewhere on there. And me, as far as food plotting, I'm somewhere kind of in the middle. I'm not super experienced, but I've done a decent amount of it. And I think as guys get into this private land thing, they just think, oh, it's about the food plots because they've heard so much about food plots, and that's just a part of the food program, right? I mean, deer obviously eat out of food plots if you have good food for them, again, throughout the year. But there's also, you mentioned forage, right, or mast and forbs. What's the difference between those for guys that don't understand? And how does that fit into the whole picture? Because if you're just doing food plots, you're just doing a little bit.
Yeah, and you nailed it there. And a little bit more about food plots than maybe you're leading on. You're not, enough to be dangerous. I've seen the bucks you kill out of that food plot, but I think that to your point, everybody starts at a food plot. It's the big sexy thing. It is fun. I mean, I have a green thumb. I like growing things, garden, trees, whatever. And if you can grow something, have a deer walk in and you shoot it, or just watch them, it's pretty awesome. So I get it, and that's where I started too. Um, but the majority of a deer's diet is browse. A lot of it woody browse, especially in the wintertime. So trees and shrubs, stuff, 5 or 6 foot and below, because deer are no taller than that. So big mature trees don't do much for that. Um, Masts, which would be your acorns, your apples, pears, things like that, beech nuts. That's the mast category. That's up there, but mostly in the fall. Forbs, which would be your green leafy plants, weeds, if you will. That's a large part of it too. Not as much as browse, but it's up there. And then, you know, I think food plots would be kind of in that forb realm. And then, there's fungi at the end, which is very, very small, but not very small, but it's fairly small compared to the others. So I think I call food plots supplemental. It's not going to hold them over the winter and keep them alive. It's not, it's not their main food source. Deer are there whether we plant food plots or not. It's just, for me, it's like the ice cream on the cake to bring them by my tree stand at 20 yards or whatever that may be. But for me, they're a necessity, but they're more supplemental, where the necessity is, that sunlight to the forest floor in your woods, for sure.
And that'll bring the new growth and the things they can actually eat, like the browse stuff and like the forbs that need the sunlight, right?
Yep, and cover. And cover that is also food. You can't beat it, really.
Right. Well, we're going to wrap up this segment of it. Next segment, we're going to look at more specifics of really the plan, getting into small, large acres. What should you do really as you develop this land management plan and looking at hunting private land. So we'll be back here for that. Make sure to check it out. And we'll also reveal Jared took the Deer IQ test, which is something listeners can also take. We'll reveal his score in the next segment. So as we wrap up, here are some key high IQ takeaways and challenges. How are you contributing to the number one problem of private landowners, overpressuring, and what can you do to fix this? How can you shoulder your weight of the blame for the quality of hunting in your area and work together with neighbors to improve the quality of the deer herd in your area? Like maybe coming up with a QDM type co-op management plan, for example. And next time we'll continue our private land series with Jared, getting deeper into exact management moves you can and should make to make your private land, whether you own it or not, the best it can and should be. We'll also see his Deer IQ test score. You won't want to miss it, and I'll see you then.